A 4.7 magnitude earthquake strikes near Malibu, giving SoCal quite the wake-up call this morning.
Yeah. This was worse, maybe 2 or 3 times as severe as the February quake.
Mark Little's referring to the quake that struck Malibu back in February. That one was roughly the same size, a 4.6, but he says this one felt worse.
Lasted longer, and the shudder and the shake was more severe.
Also broke a record for the most magnitude 4 and above quakes in SoCal in a single year, with 14 already, which led a lot of folks to question if the increase means anything.
We spoke to seismologist Dr. Lucy Jones for the answer.
This is a really good reminder that the quiet of the last couple of decades is not our long-term picture, and we do need to be prepared.
Okay guys, we have to talk about the earthquake in California again, as the aftershocks still keep coming. But what does that really mean? Because a lot of people do interpret these earthquakes in the wrong way. But let's talk about something. The Uniform California Earthquake Rupture Forecast, it's called UCERF3, predicted in 2014, so 10 years ago. So for the next 30 years, they predicted this. So let's say 20 years, because 10 years have already passed. They said there's more than 99% chance that one or more earthquakes with a magnitude 6.7 or greater will strike somewhere in California. So a 99% chance in the next 20 years. That is, right? 75% chance one or more 7.0 magnitude or greater earthquakes will strike Southern California. 76% chance one or more 7.0 magnitude or greater earthquakes will strike Northern California. And they have said this could even be dangerous for parts of Southern Oregon. And I mean, Southern Oregon, Northern California, and the whole rest of the West Coast up to Canada and Vancouver Island, they're dealing with the Cascadia fault that could produce a magnitude 9 or higher earthquake and would completely destroy the Pacific Northwest. So it seems if you're in Northern California or Southern Oregon, you could get both, which is not really great. And you know, the experts are saying California is overdue. It is 150 years overdue for a massive earthquake. So on September 12, 2024, the Southern California area around Los Angeles, but even like felt up to Santa Barbara. You see the map here, you see the circles, how far this was spreading. It was also almost reaching San Diego. It was struck by a 4.7 magnitude earthquake. At the beginning, they were saying this is a 5.1, but then they have corrected it to 4.7. So what does that mean? Does that mean, because we know with that 4.7, this year already has broken the record of the most earthquakes above magnitude 4 in a year. So does an increase in earthquake activity mean that the big one is coming? You've maybe seen my last video about California where scientists say, you know, if in order to have a magnitude 5 or higher earthquake, we have to see several smaller earthquakes. So watch that video, it's interesting. So they said an X amount of number of magnitude 4 earthquakes is needed in order to get a magnitude 5 and so on. So that's why this is concerning. So when this 4.7 hit, it seems, I mean, Californians are used to earthquakes, but this one struck in Malibu. And it seems if you look at news reports and videos of television stations that have interviewed residents, it seems this time they are really scared. They're not behaving like, yeah, just another earthquake. That's normal in California, no problem. They really look scared. And also there's some numbers that confirm that in a way, because they have an earthquake warning system app. And since that 4.7 struck, they have a completely exploded number of downloads of that early warning app. I mean, early warning does not mean hours ahead or something. Basically, they warn you when the earthquake is happening, right? So that maybe it gives you a few seconds to react before it gets worse, right? But you can't really predict it early enough so that you could get to safety. There is no earthquake prediction, but there is a warning as soon as it starts. So they're saying that California has been in an earthquake drought for the last 30 years. So drought, I mean, California has been in a drought anyways, but an earthquake drought means there have been no destructive earthquakes underneath California's most densely populated cities in the last 30 years. But what the experts are saying, this earthquake drought cannot last forever, and that now is a good time to prepare. And they're saying that despite this unusual number of higher earthquakes, the force this year in Southern California, that California overall remains still in a earthquake drought when it comes to major earthquakes. So there has been no significant damaging by earthquakes underneath California's biggest cities in the last 30 years. So that's a stark contrast to the prior 3 decades, when earthquakes in suburban areas or in mountain areas caused catastrophic damage to urban infrastructure, causing freeways and buildings to collapse, and also resulted in the loss of many, many people. So scientists are saying, for example, if you take the last 30 years as your definition of how often you should expect to be feeling earthquakes, you are underestimating the long-term rate. So since Northridge, that was in the LA area, we've been seeing fewer earthquakes and having fewer damaging ones than the long-term rate would imply. So 30 years in the drought, but how much longer? Because remember, between 1964 and 1994, Los Angeles faced 2 big earthquakes which both hit the suburban San Fernando Valley hard. So there was the 6.6 Silmar earthquake of 1971, which has resulted in the loss of 64 people, and then the magnitude 6.7 Northridge earthquake of 1994, which caused the loss of almost 60 people. And the Northridge quake has caused up to $20 billion in damage and another $40 billion or more in economic losses for California. So it was the costliest seismic disaster in US history. And then also in Northern California, there was a magnitude 6.9, the Loma Prieta earthquake, 1998. It was centered in the mountains of Santa Cruz. But despite being in the mountains there, it still caused collapses in the San Francisco downtown area and in Oakland, about 60 miles away from the epicenter. And also 63 people were lost. And now listen to this. The scientists are warning that even those earthquakes are relatively moderate compared with what could happen. They say No one alive today has experienced the kind of seismic power early Californians faced more than a century ago. This sounds frightening, guys. So in 1906, an earthquake with an estimated magnitude of 7.9 ruptured 300 miles of the San Andreas Fault. So 300 miles were ruptured at the same time. So that was going basically, if you look at today, from Humboldt County to San Benito County, and it has destroyed much of San Francisco. And then Southern California's last big one was in 1857. There was an earthquake with a magnitude of roughly 7.9 that has ruptured 224 miles of the San Andreas Fault. So also a very long area between Monterey and San Bernardino counties. So let's imagine a hypothetical future magnitude 7.8 earthquakes on the southern San Andreas Fault, basically from the Mexican border to Los Angeles County. It could result, that's their estimate, in 1,800 people lost, nearly 50,000 injuries. But that's just an estimate of the US Geological Survey's shakeout scenario. Reality still could be different. And right now, these areas are more densely populated than they were in the past when the last big ones happened there. So let's say the USGS scenario happens. This scenario would result in the deadliest quake in modern Southern California history. And they say most of the people that would be lost, more than half of it, would possibly occur in LA County alone. So that magnitude 7.8 that they're outlining in their shakeout scenario would be more than 12 times bigger than the Northridge quake. But a more important comparison shows that the shakeout scenario quake would be 45 times stronger in terms of energy released than the Northridge one. And Northridge was already bad enough, right? The 1994 Northridge earthquake resulted in perhaps like 7 to 15 seconds of shaking. That's already long enough if it's that violent. And many buildings then would face nearly 2 minutes of shaking in this new shakeout scenario. 2 minutes, that's a lot. And that's what the USGS is saying, not some rogue crazy scientist, right? So we have to take that serious. And the problem is, when we look at California, there is now an entire generation of Californians who have grown up without experiencing the damaging earthquakes that have occurred in the 1980s and the 1990s. Even smaller ones that have caused localized damage, such as the magnitude 5.9 Whittier Narrows earthquake that occurred in San Gabriel Valley. 8 people were lost. That happened in 1987. Many people even have not experienced this one, right? So certainly there have been a few earthquakes of magnitude 6 or greater in the last 3 decades that have brought damage to California, like Humboldt County saw them in 2010 and 2022, the Mojave Desert in 1999 and 2019, Napa County in 2014, Imperial County in 2010. That was resulting from an earthquake centered in Baja California, and one in San Luis Obispo County in 2003. Those were the most noteworthy of the 12 earthquakes that had a magnitude 6 or greater that have shaken up California and Nevada in the past 30 years, but they were not as catastrophic as other ones, right? So that tally is fewer than half of the 28 earthquakes of magnitude 6 or greater in the 30 years prior to that, between 1964 and 1994. So for the older Californians, of course, the earthquakes that happened in the 1980s and 1990s have brought a renewed wake-up call to California's seismic vulnerabilities, definitely, right? And a lot has been done since then. Let's imagine the 6.4 Long Beach earthquake that happened in 1993. It was centered off the Huntington Beach coast, and also the Sylmar earthquake. They have sparked changes in building codes and have led to an understanding, to a way better understanding of seismic risks. And officials have responded to the 89 and 94 earthquakes with an unprecedented seismic safety campaign that has totally remade California's freeways and bridges, and generally has raised awareness about the financial and personal stakes, right? So more progress was then even made starting about a decade ago. That was in 2013, when San Francisco has ordered retrofits of, they call it like soft story apartments, which would be vulnerable to collapse because their upper floors are only held up by flimsy, skinny columns on top of carports or garages. Los Angeles has followed that suit in 2015 and also has ordered non-ductile or brittle concrete buildings to be retrofitted. Cities in Southern California that have recently passed retrofit laws include Torrance, Pasadena, Santa Monica, Culver City, West Hollywood, and Beverly Hills. In Northern California, that includes Oakland, Berkeley, Fremont, and Mill Valley. But that is quite recently, so it's impossible that they have retrofitted everything, right? And not all of those cities have ordered retrofits of all of the types of buildings that structural engineers are concerned about. So there remain many other cities that have done nothing for decades to order vulnerable buildings to be retrofitted or even demolished. And that's why experts are saying there is much more to do, and they fear that the lack of a major urban earthquake since 1994 has kind of made people forget about the risk. This is human nature. So they're saying like apartment owners who fail to retrofit their quake vulnerable buildings risk a total loss. Yeah, that's just the building, but what about the people that live in there, right? Let's look at Northridge. There was about 200 soft-story apartment buildings in the LA area. They were seriously damaged or destroyed during that earthquake. And one of them, that was called the Northridge Meadows Complex. There were 16 people lost when the ground story collapsed under the weight of the other stories. So experts are warning that the collapse of many of these buildings in a future quake would result in an increase in homelessness and threaten the limited stock of affordable housing, imperiling a community's ability to rebound after shaking fades. Yeah, being homeless, but what about the people that are lost during these collapses, right? I mean, California has such a bad homeless problem. I don't even think this matters anymore. It's so bad already, right? But there's also other cities in California that remain decades behind in seismic safety laws compared with other jurisdictions. So that could be even more catastrophic, because other jurisdictions have began to vote decades ago to order these century-old brick buildings to be retrofitted or demolished, because these brick buildings, they are not stable to a 2-minute shaking. And there's an area that experts especially worried about. It's called the Inland Empire, and the San Andreas Fault runs right through it. And in 2018, it was reported that there are hundreds of old brick buildings in more than a dozen cities in this inland empire that remain unretrofitted despite decades of warnings. So imagine what would happen if there is another catastrophic earthquake that ruptures the San Andreas Faults at length of 250 to 300 miles. And officials of California state, they also urge normal residents of single-family homes to voluntarily retrofit their homes for their own safety. These are relatively simple fixes to protect homes, and they can prevent owners from incurring hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage if such a quake hits, or you save their lives, right? So Southern California right now has felt more earthquakes than usual. So this is not just an imagination. So this magnitude 4.7 quake that just happened on September 12th, north of Malibu, was the 14th seismic sequence so far this year alone in Southern California, with at least one earthquake of magnitude 4 or higher. So that breaks a record for the last 65 years. So that is not insignificant. So in that time period in Southern California, there were an average of 8 to 10 independent sequences of earthquakes that included at least one of magnitude 4 or greater. Some years there was just 1 or 2 of these events, and the prior record was in 1988 when there were 13 of those earthquake sequences. So what are the experts saying? They're saying the activity is not necessarily an indication that a large damaging earthquake is right around the corner. But some researchers have offered dueling theories. Some say earthquake activity goes up in a region before a large earthquake, but others are saying it's going down. So which is it, right? Again, when it comes to earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, scientists know that they don't know. So that's why the USGS is saying the recent activity does not offer any hints of when the next large destructive earthquake will occur. They're saying, yes, there's a more active year than we've had in the past right now, but we can't quite say yet, listen to yet, whether or not that is actually statistically significant to be seeing this. But what they're saying is these quakes are a really good reminder that the quiet of the last couple of decades is not our long-term picture, and that we do need to be prepared. So yeah, LA earthquakes have been unusually frequent this year, as this latest Malibu tremor shows, and we have to wait and see how this is going to unfold. And if you live in California, I hope you're aware, I hope you'll be prepared, and I hope you'll be safe. That's all I can say to this. I will definitely follow up if there's new information for you guys. Please leave this video a like, share it with your friends, and become a subscriber or even a member of my channel. The links are all in the description of this video, and I hope I'll see you soon. If you're bored, check out the videos here in the end screen. It's really good stuff, guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.